Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are once again in the heart of the European Union, in the European Parliament, to discuss the UNESCO vote on the status of Jerusalem. And currently there is a vote that's going to take place at the end of October that will determine the status of Jerusalem, as many claim that this is a Muslim holy site and not a Jewish or Christian holy site, which is contrary to history. And in today's programme, I'm joined by my good friend Tomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, and Lars Adaktusson, Swedish MP and a member of the European People's Party, and Alex Benjamin, director of Europe-Israel Public Affairs. So, gentlemen, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Thomas, I'll start off with you because you've had a very significant meeting with none other than the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about the UN recognising Yom Kippur as a national and international holiday.
Thank you, Simon. It's good to sit down. As you know, I've been traveling almost non-stop for six weeks, so I've been looking forward for this opportunity. 3 weeks ago we were in Jerusalem and we did have a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu and his staff. And I think it's worth mentioning in this program, the first thing he said was, "You are our best friends." And he didn't, just relate to me or to ECI, but I think Bible-believing Christians in the world who stand up for Israel, he really have a high regard for the Christian community. I think there were two messages out of this discussion that we had with Netanyahu, where he was very grateful for the fact of the work we've been doing at the United Nations with the Yom Kippur initiative, but obviously also here at the European institutions. One of the messages was that Israel is not isolated. And I think it's important from a European perspective to understand that although we may get the feeling in this parliament that Israel is rather isolated, this is certainly not the case. And I can later in the program give many examples of what this means, for example, on a UN level. Second is that Israel is Europe's best line of defense. And earlier this morning I was attending a conference here in the European Parliament where we had Israeli security experts basically teaching European governments, members of European parliaments, how to deal with this new situation that we are in now in Europe with increasing terrorist threats. And I think this message is also slowly starting to come across here in the European Parliament. Israel is not a problem. Israel is a solution to many of the problems we are facing in Europe right now.
Absolutely. And Alex Benjamin, it's good to have you back on the programme. The last time we did a programme together, it was a very fierce debate between the two big conservative beasts in the European Parliament on Brexit. So,
very well, Simon.
So it's good to see that you've recovered.
Thank you.
Now, as of the recording of this programme, we've had the sad news that Israel's President Shimon Peres has died at the grand old age of 93. What would you like to say about Shimon Peres? Because you had the opportunity to actually meet the man himself.
How do you even begin to describe what this man achieved throughout his lifetime? All I can say, and I'll put it in as simple terms as possible, he was Israel and Israel was him. What I mean by that is that he was an individual who was compassionate, warm, caring, sought peace, but was tough when the situation demanded him to be tough. And Israel and Jews around the world have lost an Abba, a father, somebody who we looked up to for many years. So we say Baruch Dayan Emet in Hebrew, which means blessed be the true judge. And I think nobody at the ripe old age of 93, as you say, nobody will hold it against him for having a bit of rest. And I think he achieved more in his lifetime than most of us could ever dream of achieving.
Absolutely. And Lars, it's good to have you back on the programme, and you've done tremendous work in getting recognition, particularly here in the European Parliament, of the plight of Christians facing persecution in the Middle East, and to actually get the ISIS attacks on the Christian community and the Yazidi community classified as genocide, and that's no mean feat. So firstly, well done for the excellent work you're doing here in the European Parliament. But you've recently been in Syria, and you've made national news headlines in Syria by being very close to a mortar. Can you share with us what your experience was like on your delegation to Syria?
Sure. Let me first also express my condolences when it comes to President Perez. He was truly a statesman.
Absolutely.
And we will miss him for a long time, of course. And I remember one interview which he gave when he turned 90, 2013. He was asked by a British paper if he believed in peace during his lifetime. And he immediately answered yes. And I think that's pretty much summarizes his approach and his vision, which he never gave up. So he will certainly be missed. When it comes to the trip to Syria, it was a very interesting experience. I was invited by the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church. They put together a very good program for us, and the ceasefire was in place when we arrived, but it obviously didn't hold because we were shot at by a mortar which was exploding pretty close to our car, our convoy where we were traveling. So that was, of course, very unpleasant, but it was also a reminder of the situation for the people of Damascus and people of Syria. This is the reality in which they are living every day. So that was of course unpleasant, but still interesting to meet with the people who are suffering so badly.
Absolutely. And Thomas, maybe you can actually bring a bit of context to today's discussion, that UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization, is having a vote on Jerusalem. It was first postponed because of the Turkish coup, but now it's going to have a vote in October that will determine the status of Jerusalem, which denies the rights of Jewish history and Jewish links to the Temple Mount and other holy sites in Jerusalem. So can you share with us why this vote is so significant and who's actually behind this and why this is so damaging?
Yeah, let's first of all say that when we are looking at UNESCO, there's already been a vote by the Executive Committee, which is the governing committee of UNESCO, which already came to this very unfortunate conclusion to say that the western wall of the Temple Mount should only be referred to with its Arab Muslim names and not with the Jewish names, thus denying any connection between the Jewish people and their holy sites in Jerusalem. What we have now is something called the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO, which in a scientific way will define these World Heritage sites around the world, and one of them now is the western wall of the Temple Mount. And again, the recommendation is the same, to say that this is, it will only be referred to with its Arab names. In this particular committee, not all members of UNESCO are represented, and that's perhaps important to know as well. There are only some 3 European countries, but nevertheless the outcome will be very important. I think the context is really to understand the bigger picture of international lawfare against Israel at the international institutions. So I think the rationale behind it is those who dislike Israel, want to defeat Israel, they basically came to the conclusion you cannot win Israel militarily. And you cannot even win Israel through terrorist attacks. You have to delegitimize the whole concept of a Jewish state. So this is what is going on a UN level, and we see it perhaps most clearly at a UNESCO level. And the message is basically this: if we can prove scientifically, because UNESCO is a scientific arm of the UN, that Jews don't belong in Israel, then it's so much easier to reach a peace agreement to say that, this is Palestinian land. We already have UNESCO and UN resolutions verifying this. Israel will have a very weak case to defend, their right in Israel. And I think we saw this also at the UN General Assembly last week in New York when Abbas spoke. He didn't speak like he does done in the past about the so-called occupation, but about the Balfour Declaration. Hence, meaning that the whole idea of Jews living in the Middle East, in Palestine, in Israel, is something which for him is a great problem and is the cause of all the conflicts in that whole region. And I think that makes it very black and white in a way. Do we recognize the right of the Jewish people to live in their homeland, so be it side by side with the Palestinian state, or do we say that the Jews don't belong in Israel at all? Scientifically, there's never been a temple, the first temple or second temple, and here I think the European institutions need to be very clear. We cannot compromise with these vital facts.
Absolutely. And Alex, I want to bring you on board on this one. Not only are you Jewish, but you've devoted your entire life, including your professional life, to the defense of Israel and the defense of your people. Now, we know our biblical history. We know that the Temple Mount is the archaeological remains of the first and the second Jewish temple, long before Muhammad ascended on the scene. What does Jerusalem mean to you, and why is this UNESCO vote so damaging in terms of its whole way it wants to present Jerusalem and Jewish history in Jerusalem?
Let's deal with UNESCO first. As Thomas rightly pointed out, there's a bit of previous on this. They have a bit of a background on this. In fact, the Americans stopped funding UNESCO. 22% of their funding was cut back in 2011 when they admitted Palestinian state and gave statehood to UNESCO. So since then, they've been gradually and slowly becoming more antagonistic towards Israel. To be honest with you, this decision reminds me of South Africa, and I'll come to that in a minute. Who can decide where somebody can go or somebody can't go? Okay? Now, you're quite rightly pointed out, what does Jerusalem mean to me? Well, first of all, I'm more of a Tel Avivian myself, but that's another story. But Jerusalem is obviously our spiritual homeland. It's where the holiest site that I can go and pray and feel connected to is located. I want to say that for me, it's a ridiculous move. One of the things that is often leveled at Israel is that Israel's an apartheid state. Well, here we have an international organization actively promoting apartheid. And what Jews can't go up there? I have a young daughter who's going to hopefully come into the world in November. Please God. Thank you. I want to bring her to the Kotel, to the wall. Now, if she turns around to me and says, "Daddy, why can't we go up there?" Sweetheart, sorry, you can't go up there. This isn't for Jews. Jews aren't allowed up there. What kind of message does this send? Jerusalem, the old city, as everyone around this table has been to, is supposed to be a shared space. So how can UNESCO arbitrarily say that this particular area is not for Jews, this is not an area for Jews? I mean, what's next? Do we start putting the little signs on the water fountains saying whites only, or black? I mean, it's a slippery slope from my point of view.
Absolutely. And Lars, I just want to quote from the Israeli Prime Minister in his address to the UN Security Council only yesterday, in which he said that UNESCO's approach in this regard is a circus. This is hard to believe, but UNESCO has just denied 4,000-year connection between the Jewish people and its holiest site, the Temple Mount. That's just absurd, making a connection between the Great Wall of China and China. Firstly, what do you make of his speech? And also, what can be done? Because not only is this an attack on our Jewish friends, but this is also a fundamental attack on our Judeo-Christian heritage as well, knowing that the Temple Mount is the archaeological place of the first and the second temple, which is so sacred to our shared scriptures.
Yeah. Firstly, I would say that I fully understand the frustration and the anger from the Israeli side. UNESCO's approach is unfair, it's unbalanced, as Alex said, and it basically, we have to realize that it denies the historic and also very obvious connection between Jewish history and the Temple Mount. So therefore this decision, of course, is a mockery, as the Prime Minister says. It's also a betrayal of Jewish history, of the Jewish people, and frankly, to be honest, I mean, it's politically stupid. It makes no sense, and therefore I see no other solution than either UNESCO has to change the decision or drop it. I mean, it's unacceptable in all ways, and what we can do, of course, from this Parliament and as parliamentarians is to use our platform, political platform, in order to build opinion and to try to influence the national governments, because even if this is a forum where the EU member states used to coordinate their positions, it is not always the case that these coordinations are successful. So I think the tool that we need to use is to influence the different governments in the member states in order to change this position. We will certainly do in Sweden, where I come from, since Sweden was one of few countries, Western countries, European countries, who voted for this resolution. We have been working hard in order to try to change it, and we will continue that, of course.
Excellent. And Thomas, I have to ask you, look, when it comes to the issue of Jerusalem, it's only been under Israeli sovereignty that the rights of Jews and Christians and Muslims and all the holy sites in Jerusalem are protected. Now, isn't the great danger in this that UNESCO is leading to the Islamification of Jerusalem, which would endanger that freedom to visit the Kotel or to visit the Holy Church, the Scripture in Jerusalem?
I absolutely agree, and but we should perhaps also point out that if we, with the two-state solution where we declare East Jerusalem, being Old Jerusalem as the old city, as a capital of an Islamic Palestinian state, we are in fact saying the same thing, because we know, and it doesn't take a lot of guessing, what would be the status for non-Muslims in a future Islamic Jerusalem. It would, of course, be the best scenario would be Jerusalem pre-1967 under Jordanian rule, a moderate Jordanian rule, but which still prevented any Jews from praying at the holy sites or even entering the old city. So, but I think we have a very strong point here, and always when I raise it with EU officials, they agree. And I think it only shows again how much the whole issue of the Middle East just is a discussion which lacks a lot of common sense. And I think it's our work here in the European institutions, Lars as a member of European Parliament and Alex and myself as outside people influencing policies, just to point out these facts, because if we believe in universal values, as Alex said, they can't be exclusive. Jerusalem cannot become a new Mecca where people who don't subscribe to Islam have no business. And what we see at the UNESCO is also one step in this direction. Let me just be very clear and point out that in this particular committee we have Poland, Croatia and Finland from the Western European, from the European countries. And I think these countries in particular needs to be targeted now before the vote.
Absolutely. I know, Lars, you
one other point which is important to focus on is that the fact that this is definitely a matter of credibility for the whole UN system. I mean, we have a history here over the years we have seen UN been biased, been unbalanced in its approach to Israel. Last year, I looked up the facts the other day, and last year the UN General Assembly adopted 20 resolutions singling out Israel for criticism, and 3 resolutions on the rest of the world combined. These countries were, by the way, North Korea, Iran, and Syria. So this says something about the general approach within the UN system against Israel. And here we have to be very, very clear to point out that this is a symptom of something bigger going on.
Can I jump in there as well? I mean, I literally could not agree more with what Mr. Adaktusson has just said. When we talk about UNESCO, let's be fully aware that this is like the younger daughter of the UN. I mean, it comes from the same family. I can give you some fairly shocking statistics. There's just some research which was published in the last month that Israel is referred to as an occupying power 530 times in General Assembly resolutions in the UN. And there are 7 other major instances, we're talking about Indonesia and East Timor, Turkey and North Cyprus, Russia in areas of Georgia, Morocco in Western Sahara, Vietnam and Cambodia, Armenia in areas of Azerbaijan, and Russia currently in Ukraine. How many times have any of these countries been called an occupying power? 0. Not even once. Okay, and it gets worse. General Assembly resolutions from the UN have referred to Israeli-held territories as occupied 2,342 times. Now, the opposite side of that is the countries which I just mentioned above have only been mentioned as occupied 16 times. There is clearly at the UN and in UNESCO an unhealthy fascination, obsession, bias, whatever you want to call it, against Israel, and it needs to be rooted out.
Absolutely. So we're down to the last 3.5 minutes of the programme. So Thomas, you know, what can our viewers do to help to change this shocking vote that UNESCO are having on the status of Jerusalem? And what can the European Parliament and the European institutions do to try and prevent this vote from taking place?
Well, let me first say that a lot is being done behind the scenes. There are many organizations that are active in raising this point and also raising out to the very influential Christian organizations, and not to exclude the Vatican, that we together could raise this point and say, you know, in all fairness, let history be history, let's not politicize. Let Jerusalem be a shared city also in the future. And here I think it's so crucial that the influential Christian voices in the world really are being heard, and not just being quiet and say, well, you know, this is not a big issue for us if there was a temple or not. Of course, it's the fundamental of our faith as well. So all the viewers who have contacts with the local pastors, with the bishop, with anyone in clergy should raise this point. And I think together we can make a difference. Let me just also say that yesterday there was a very important conference here in the European Parliament, and Lord Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi, he said something very interesting. He said, anti-Zionism today is the new form of anti-Semitism. Yep. And he said, this is why Israel is being singled out again, with the same language as we heard in the 1930s. And this is from a very respected religious leaders that cross all the denominational lines, and we should repeat this to our leaders.
Absolutely. And Lars, what can be done here on a political level? I mean, is it helpful that people write to you, they write to their local MPs to raise this as an issue, to raise this here in the European Parliament?
Well, as I said, we can't intervene in the direct process within the UN system, but as politicians, of course, we can use our influence, and we can use our influence on the national level, which I think is most effective in this specific case. But when it comes to the more long run and perspective for the future, I think this is an example of an increasing hostility against Israel, which we have seen for a very, very long time in Europe. And we have to confront this, of course, and to work in the long run in order to give another image of Israel and to give the full picture of what's going on in the region.
Benjamin, I'm going to give you the last word. So in 30 seconds, what can be done?
What really worries me is it's not up to me to say what can be done, it's up to the politicians and the directly elected representatives. I want to say that what this move does is legitimize Mahmoud Abbas's claim all along that no filthy Jewish feet should be allowed on the Temple Mount. And UNESCO have effectively allowed Abbas's lie to become a reality.
Absolutely. And Thomas, would you like to mention the ECI conference coming up in London on the 5th of November?
Very quickly, when we speak about the foundation of the Jewish state, in November will be the 99th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, and we will host a conference on the 5th of November in London to speak more about these issues and bring in a very renowned international lawyer, Jacques Gauthier, to speak about specifically Jerusalem. So I hope to see many of the viewers there.
Excellent. And I just want to thank you all for watching today's European report from the European Parliament. And it's important that we make a stand, particularly against this UNESCO threat, which is a threat to Jewish identity and also a threat to Jewish history and also our shared history, because this was the site of the first and the second temple. And so therefore we know that this belongs to the Jewish people. And the only way we can protect freedom of religion in Jerusalem is to allow Israel to continue to have sovereignty over her sacred city. So thank you for watching today's European report.